Okay, so I want to say a little bit about e-tivity. It's really going to build on what we've talked about already, and I'm going to try and provide you with a bit more insight about how e-tivities actually work. So let's start with an e-tivity. The first thing we probably want to start with is we have some ideas about what we want people to learn. So we perhaps have got some learning outcomes or learning objectives. So that's our thinking about, well, what is it that we want someone to actually learn? And simply what we try and do when we create those kind of learning objectives is we then basically find a way of telling people that information. So then we create a resource out of that. So let's create a resource. So a resource doesn't have to just be a lecture, it doesn't have to just be somebody telling somebody something. It could be a video, it could be a piece of text, it could perhaps just be an image that conveys the message of what it is you want someone to think about, what it is you want someone to learn. But the creation of a resource in and of itself is not an e-tivity. So an e-tivity only happens once we start to get students to engage with this resource. So the next part of an e-tivity is building a mechanism for engagement. So we've got that mechanism for engagement here. And so when we're building a mechanism for engagement, what we're doing is something like we've been doing in this course, where we've been saying, okay, we want you to have a look at this resource, and we then want you to perhaps write a summary or something that's inspired by it in some way. And that's really important because it gets the students to think about the resource. But we actually then take it a stage further, and this is because we're working with a kind of social constructivist type of pedagogy here. And what we want to do is we want to create some kind of interaction. So we've got an interaction, and that usually will relate very closely to this idea of engagement that we've got here. So our interaction, we take the students' engagement, we take their engagement with the resource, and we get them to discuss. We get them to share information. In our course, what we've been doing is we've been getting you to write something, a post, and then getting other people to comment on it. And so through that process of interaction and engagement, we start to see what the students are actually learning from this, and we start to see their ideas. But also the students start to develop new ideas, and they start to spark off each other. And if one of them doesn't understand, the others can help out, and so on. So this is the kind of process that we've got going on. And what we hope is that through this, we also create a mechanism for assessment. And assessment is really a very important part of this, because it's our role as the teacher, the tutor, the careers professional, is that we're trying to understand what it is that learners are actually getting out of this. So we've given them a resource. Have they understood it? Have they come up with interesting things? Is their discussion going in the right direction? Is there anything that we could put in, perhaps with our expertise? Could we shape the discussion, facilitate the discussion better? And so we're going to try and use that. And assessment gives us that mechanism of doing that. So we can see it through this, and that means we can assess it. And because we can assess it, we can then input back in as an interaction. So that's this idea of assessment for learning. That's a really, really powerful idea. Now, there's another thing that's very important in career learning, I think, is that in career learning, we're often trying to get people to learn, not just to learn the content, but also to take action on that, to do something. So a particularly specialised form of engagement that we might get people to do is action planning of some kind. And taking action more generally. So we want to see them understanding the resource, but we also want to see them thinking about what does this resource mean. And so that's a really important thing, and it also is something where the interaction with other learners can be useful, because we can get other learners to support their action planning, to encourage them, to help them to think through how they might make use of this. So we're starting to build up a structure, which is the e-tivity. And this would be very much the same if we were in a face-to-face classroom. So I might give a lecture, you might ask some questions, I might break you into groups, and so on. We have that kind of same sort of thing. But it's often something that we do without thinking about it in quite the same way. When we're online, or when we're doing some kind of e-tivity, we have to also think about the technology. Because the technology frames how this can work. Now, ideally, we make choices about the technology. We don't just pick whatever's there. So we make a decision. Is this the sort of thing that would be best done in a asynchronous chat room? Or is this something that would be best done in something like a Zoom video conference? And depending on the decision we make about the technology, we're going to make different decisions about how each of these components is going to work. And we're going to have to firstly document those things for ourselves to understand how they work, and then we're going to have to explain to the students how that's going to work as well. And so that's why the e-tivity, the structure of an e-tivity is very important. So we think, when we create an e-tivity, we think, what are all these different bits? What resource are we going to use to spark people off? How are we going to get them to engage with it? How are we going to get them to interact with other learners? Particularly in career learning, we're going to encourage them to be thinking about action planning. Underpinning it all, we want to think, how can we understand what's going on? How can we understand what they're learning? That's assessment. And that stuff together is our pedagogy. And that relates to the technology as well. So if we put all of this stuff together, this is what an e-tivity is. And so what I hope you can see is that we moved quite a long way when we're talking about e-tivities, from just thinking about an e-tivity is creating a resource and showing people what I want them to think. Thank you.